Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carroll Connection. I am your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out my last week's episode 165, the 2023 year in review episode with Andrew Brown. Came on the podcast. We talked a lot about what happened throughout the year for us, some of our relationship struggles and successes, and we talked about specifically for him some of the stuff with coaching, going from high school to women's professional to the collegiate level and what that's been like. And then we talked a lot about the stuff that we want to achieve and accomplish in 2024. And I thought it was a really great episode to recap 2023. So if you guys can, go check that out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection, or at Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. So, brings me to today. So this is kind of like the first official episode that will be released in 2024.
Awesome.
Aside from the 2023 year in review, but that's kind of like a review, obviously. So happy to do this with my guest here for episode 166, Nick Lancellotti.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excited to do this, and I was excited when I reached out that you were very willing to do this, and that obviously with the holidays, it kind of aligned perfectly to get you back, and you're back in the area. So it was everything aligned, and obviously with a lot of stuff we talked about, spiritually, everything just aligned perfectly, and the way we've been able to connect. And we could have talked for another 3 hours before we even did this, and I was like, we gotta get on the podcast and get some of this.
10 years to catch up on.
Seriously. So I'd like to kind of start off with a little quick who you are and what you're doing currently.
Sure. So right now, I'm working as a professional structural engineer in New York. I work for a company down in FIDE. We do everything from, big name hotels to residential to, commercial. We work sometimes with SDA, the School Construction Authority, doing schools, artists, some sculptures here and there. So we run the gambit for types of work. And on the side, I did dance for a little bit in New York when I first moved there. That's kind of been cast by the wayside after COVID. But right now, I'm in addition to doing that work, I'm part of a group within our company where we focus on low-income housing. It's called the Building Equity Initiative, BEI, low-income housing, and any other types of projects that are focused on giving back to the community and promoting that sense of community. So and now kind of a side project, which I can get into later, is working on some activism work with a friend of mine in DC in preparation for what will be a very interesting presidential election, as we can all tell. So a lot of stuff happening, and just ready to take on the new year.
Yeah, and we'll dive into a lot of that stuff too as we progress with the podcast and progress with your life story. And I think it'll be really great to add that piece in, especially starting 2024 and seeing what's to come. We all can feel it. It's all there. It's all in the news. We all know between just the economy and just like the way the world is currently with a lot of these wars and our own presidential election that's coming up. There's a lot of emotions that are going to be very heightened around this time of the year. So I think it'll be a good discussion to have some of these topics, especially with the stuff that you're working on.
Yeah.
So I like to kind of open the podcast though, talking about family dynamic. And for you guys, if you guys are listening or watching, you guys know I like to always do my little cliche of why I do family dynamic. And I always reference kind of like when we're building a house. The foundational pieces is this works perfect. So when I think of how we start our lives, a lot of that derives from our family, derives from our childhood and where this stuff really stems from. So I think it's always important to at least acknowledge it and talk about it and kind of what it was like for you, because I always think it's important for me as a host to kind of get a feel for how someone grew up a little bit. Obviously I know you, so I know some of the stuff, but there might be stuff that I don't know, so I think it's always important to ask this question. So it's whatever you're comfortable with sharing. I'll let you talk about your family dynamic.
So I, as you know, and many people who know me know, I grew up with two educators, two parents as teachers. My mom teaches first grade, or has taught every grade in elementary school except for third, and my dad teaches business and financial planning at a high school. So I've grown up with this kind of instilled love of learning, and reading different books and just learning so as much as I possibly could, just being a sponge. And that was very actively encouraged. The academic side, but also my dad was very big at pushing like learning through athletics and learning team building, and that kind of camaraderie, and how to work together as a team. Like it's one thing to you know to be intelligent and to work on your own. It's another thing to then use that in a group, and lean on each other's strengths, and fill in for other people's weaknesses. So that's a very valuable thing that I had been brought up with. And then and then my the biggest thing I think going through my past was um just sixth grade or so, starting to understand like, I'm not like other people. I had gravitating towards certain feelings that I had, and just leading up into me discovering like, yeah, I'm gay. Like, great. What do I do with this now? So the growing up, it was very, I felt split a little bit between two different worlds. We grew up Catholic as well, and that's been a whole kind of progression of spirituality and religion, and we can get into that later. Um, but just on the one hand, I obviously love my parents and they love me for who I was, but I had never revealed that aspect to them until I was in college. So there was a very, very long period of time where I felt like I was living kind of two different lives, and I had my, even with my family, I had my like outward persona, and then I had my, what was happening inside, in my own space, in my own head. And so I feel like while I had a really amazing upbringing, and I am incredibly blessed and lucky to have grown up in the family that I have been, and I acknowledge that, but I feel like I some sense of regret or guilt, even, where I squandered a little bit of that because I didn't allow myself to be fully vulnerable with my family, which many gay people can relate to that. It's a safety thing, it's a self-protection thing, and you eventually grow out of that. But at the time it was very, I didn't think I could be my full self, and that might have held me back from certain things. And I've actually talked about this, or wrote about it in my like official coming out post on Instagram, where I talk about specifically with my brother and the relationship I had with my brother, where he was someone who very charismatic, had a lot of friends, and also played sports. And so I had felt this responsibility to not come out, almost like for his sake, because I didn't want to be an embarrassment for him or have him get picked on because he had a gay older brother. So that, I think, caused a little bit of a rift between us growing up, since has been repaired for sure as we've become adults and talked about things a little bit. And that post was one of the kind of ways that, not reconciled, but we came to understand each other a little bit more. Um, but yeah, I feel like I prevented myself from fully fully enjoying the life that I was blessed with, because I didn't feel like I almost like deserved it. In a sense, I felt like I was, um, felt like I was a disappointment. I felt like, or I could have been a disappointment. Um, and speaking to like how I was growing up in school, like, and this is a thing for a lot of gay men as well, where you feel like you have to constantly be on or constantly be doing something to prove yourself, so that if it does come out that you're gay, you can say, oh well, I did all these other things despite this. Like it's your shield and your kind of protection from any sort of finger pointing or harassment or abuse. It's like you can stand on what you've done, but it still was never like enough. Like there's always that, um that sense of, guilt or just self-loathing, even, like, and just really trying to pull yourself out of that through achievement, um for the sake of loving yourself more rather than like, this is something I really want to do. This is something that um, this is something that drives me and fulfills me. And it was part of it was that, yes, but the other part of it was I'm doing this because I almost feel like I have to, because if I don't, then either people will know or people will say things about me and whatever. And it's a difficult mentality to get out of for sure, but that's kind of like the gist of living in two worlds, I think. And I would say a lot of gay people can relate to that is, um, it's one thing to grow up with a family who loves you. It's another thing to accept that they love you even. Um, and then of course there's others who aren't accepted by their family. And again, I count myself to be very, very lucky to have grown up where I was with the people that I had, and even just surrounded by certain friends growing up that were, while I wasn't out, picked up on it and were there for me a lot of the time. So, um, yeah, that's kind of like the long and short of growing up. And
Yeah, and I'm glad that you felt comfortable enough to talk about that,
yeah,
and that's why I didn't like push for you to talk about that, because I've had people who also will like don't want to make that the whole conversation, but I
yeah, of
always
course,
think it's important to allow that space for if you do want to talk about it, because it was a pivotal point for you too, especially growing up and going through a lot of these emotions. And also culturally, like it wasn't as like, I guess, as accepting as it is now. Like now it's very accepting, I would say,
yeah.
for the most part. And back then it was definitely a little bit different, and that probably added to some of those fears about coming out.
No, absolutely, and I see that a lot in the way that my brother came up too, and because he's 4 years younger than me, and so so we never were actually in the same school at the same time. So when I was a senior in high school, he was in 8th grade. So once I moved out, he moved in, and so we never had a crossover in the same space, and which would have, I think, contributed more to what I was stressing about and kind of my anxiety rumination of he's gonna get bullied. It's like it would have never trickled down anyways, like unless we were in the same school maybe. But yeah, I think his generation, even just 4 years after ours, is much more um accepting, especially with like other men. Like there seems to be much more of like a brotherhood camaraderie and just understanding of each other and their emotions. And I think this podcast also speaks to that as well. Like there's definitely a shift, a recognizable and significant shift in the way that men in general are talking about themselves and their feelings and their emotions, and I think that's amazing. And I think we're also seeing a lot more, his generation for sure shows a lot more like platonic intimacy and friendship intimacy, hugging each other, like saying I love you to your friends. Like that's something that I don't think either of us had
Yeah.
ever seen or experienced growing up in our time. So it's I love to see it. It brings me a lot of joy to see how far things have come in such a short amount of time, even in just like this town in general, not even talking about the nation as a whole, but like, from 4 years is 4 year difference in us, and already like it's night and day.
Yeah, I think a huge part of that too was we were kind of talking about this off podcast with the millennial Gen Z cutoff type thing, and the the way we were raised was very different than like a lot of our younger siblings,
Yeah.
because the technology really caught up within the span of years too. On top of that, like obviously we had the internet on some extent. We had video games in some extent. We had all these different TV shows to that level, but we were still that generation, still part of it at least, of going outside and playing with your friends and like that old school mentality to it. And that I can see how that energy could contribute to fears of people coming out. And I definitely could see your reservation for doing that, especially in
Yeah.
some of the circles that we definitely rolled in back
Yes.
then, and in type of sports and stuff, the cliques that were part of that school as well. I could definitely understand of why the timidness or the fear of coming out and maybe feeling like you might let down was your family, yourself,
Yeah.
your brother, your friends, people around you might look at you differently for that. And
Yeah.
I think that fear was probably rational at the time, but like people would have come around to it and been accepting, especially the fact that you excelled in so many different things on top of that. Obviously, you're saying it's somewhat of a fear
Hmm.
and like kind of like your shield,
Yeah.
but you were so good at so many things where I think a lot of people would have looked the other way and not been like bothered by it either.
Yeah, and I think back to Sports, especially like sports,
You can
has
dive into that
been
too, the childhood and sports and all that stuff
yeah,
too.
sports has been one of the kind of slower things to start to come around in terms of LGBTQ acceptance, and we're seeing a lot more athletes now be outspoken. Like certainly the number of athletes who are out is still very very low. Like, and I'm sure there are plenty of other people who are flying under the radar right now. But um, yeah, just even as like being a quarterback and being in a leadership position, like to me, my biggest fear was that would be compromise, and that like if I'm supposed to be on the field directing, or at least you know. Being the middleman between a play that coach would call out to just delivering it into a huddle, like to not have or to think that like authority almost, or like not even authority, like what's the word for it, I guess, like just like that relationship is compromised, like to not be taken seriously or to be considered less valuable, or that my leadership for however it was granted to me, like was not true. Like that was kind of the biggest thing, is just being pushed to the side, or not taken seriously, or um, yeah, especially in a sports setting, it was really tough. And also I kind of joke about this too, like being a quarterback, like you gotta be a little
I mean, the
hands on.
joke's sort of in there at
Yeah, you
first.
gotta be a little hands on. Um, but like it's always never about that. It was always about how can we act as a team, how can we work as a team, and how can we score a goal. As you know, it was
Difficult.
our year was a
Yeah.
difficult year
I mean, we
to
still got into
score.
the playoffs,
Yeah, we did.
and it's just those old Rochester games. I will never.
Connor quit.
Well, those we got fucking
Blasted.
spanked. Like,
Blasted.
I just think of the old Rochester games. Like, you were hurt for one of them, right? Because we
Mm.
didn't have any quarterbacks. I think you were hurt, Brendan was hurt, and we had just Ben, and
Yeah.
like Ben was not the quarterback for that. It's just because I know I have a video of you throwing me a flea flicker touchdown,
Yep.
and I think that was the first game we played against them. And I mean, the thing with that team was, and obviously we're walking down memory
I
lane,
know.
but
It's been 10 years. I'm sorry.
yeah, and we haven't really talked about like this, like
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, literally 10 years. So I mean, I always think back on that team, and it makes me somewhat sad because of how much like potential and athleticism we did have as a class, to let so many egos and personalities kind of ruin that and not fully buy in to what Coach Crawford was teaching us,
Hmm.
not only about football but just life in general. There's so many stuff that I, even when I talk to like Jeff LePage off podcasts and stuff, the stuff that coach taught through the game of sport, through the game of football, that I've used in my own personal life.
Hmm.
And even the fact that they even have a turf field now is because of that man
Do they
putting.
really?
Yeah, Seacon has turf
No
now.
way.
Yeah, and part of it is because Coach Agile and Coach Texera have come in a new regime and
Yep.
bringing like the old Seacon energy back to it, and like it's hometown, homegrown type thing. But
Yeah.
Coach Crawford was a huge reason why this town and that sport really elevated to another level and kind of modernized.
Yeah.
And that was huge for it. And I think that team, just there was so many things that I think went wrong with our
Mhm.
team in terms, but I don't think it was really ever a skill issue. It was really just personality issue.
Yeah, it was a camaraderie issue. It was like you said, we had a lot of big personalities, and
Different clicks and
yeah, there's no
just
fault to anyone. It's just that sometimes they don't mix well, and that's oh well.
yeah, we
Like it is
literally
what it
lost
is.
our way into the playoffs. Like we were
Yeah.
good enough to make the play. We lost our way into the playoffs. That's
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
I think too, uh, and this may have changed obviously, but something I noticed definitely growing up with sports, um and actually this is kind of what led me to do more like theater and dance, like once I got older, like at the end of high school, and even into college, was there, like both, like with dance and sports, you compete as a team, but you also sort of compete against each other for positioning, or for roles and whatnot, for theater as well. um but with sports, there just seemed to, and this just might be a small town issue, or but I think it speaks to a lot of different places where the politics of sports can get a little dicey, and I was very aware of that, growing up, and even being in a leadership role in sports, being a quarterback was like I think I had some expectation of like how things were gonna go, um, and it was not bad. It was a lot of finger pointing and people talking in people's ears and certain people getting, more playtime for whatever reason. And I'm not going to go into all that, but it was since middle school, since I had started football, like that had always been the case. Since to baseball, that was always the case.
It's the reason I quit baseball.
That's the reason I quit baseball too. Like freshman year, were you in baseball?
Yeah,
In
freshman
high
year.
school? Yeah,
Yeah,
so we both quit it
yeah,
basically after that
yeah. I
season.
did not play sophomore year. I dedicated myself more to football because
Yeah,
just
I did football and track.
I
Yeah,
liked the sport better too.
yeah. I
It's just the
thought,
politics in baseball were very very um, undeniable. Like you could at least to a certain extent ignore some of the football ones because obviously football parents are football parents, but like it's baseball. Like if you didn't play like the Legion baseball, like you're not getting playing time.
yeah, there was like I said, there was like an expectation of or I had my expectations of what I would do, but then there was a lot of other expectations that were put on you, and not even really spoken. It was like you had to be in certain circles to even know about these things, and which I never was. But I actually, speaking to that, I kind of prided myself on that, where um, I was able to traverse different groups in high school, and I was friends with the academic kids. I was friends with the kids in sports. I was friends with kids in theater and band and all these other things. And um,
I think that's why our relationship was able to go further than
yeah,
a lot of those because we were. I always say that too. Like I was able to be friends with not just sports people. Like
yeah,
it goes beyond that, and I think that helped me even create this podcast. But I think that helps our relationship. It's not just the football stuff or the sports stuff. It goes
sure.
beyond that. Like I think about people not might not get this reference, but I remember this comedian talking about mac and cheese, and we watched it in my basement, and like the sound of eating mac and cheese was like I think it was Gabriel, like the big Mexican
Oh yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
I
Gabriel
remember,
Iglesias.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know if you showed me that, but I vividly remember us like watching that like comedy special and just like that
dying.
specific, yeah, the sound of the mac and cheese. If people know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
yeah, that and that just
WAP.
I just remember specifically watching that with you just dying
Yeah,
laughing and just like it's just stuff like that. It's like it's not even about like the sports stuff, but it's the friendships that you can make from sports that are super valuable and then adding
absolutely.
to that.
Absolutely. And I still actually, one of the people that I talk to, I don't talk to him as often as I would like to or I should. But one person that I talk to, probably one of the most frequently, probably most frequently out of anyone from our graduating class is Mike Ludi. I still talk to Mike Ludi every single year. I send him a birthday text every single year. I go to see him and his girlfriend, fiance, these 3 kids now. Like, like amazing. Like it's the just like the memories that I have of like you and him and everyone from football to like where everyone is now. I'm like like literally just worlds apart. But that's what I love the most about coming back home. When I do visit and always just like checking up on people on Instagram or on social media and just seeing how they're doing. And even if we like don't talk, I'm whoever's watching, even if we don't talk, I am still watching. Like I love all of you who, who still follow me and you all know who you are. But like yeah, it makes me so proud to come from uh, a small town, and I think that's definitely shaped a lot of who I am now with um just how I view community and how I view um neighborliness and friendships. um just recently, actually, our neighbor, the Correas, Pedro Correa, passed away with stage 4 pancreatic. He was diagnosed last Christmas. um and wasn't given that much time to live, and just passed away a couple months ago. Um, and I came back for that out of, you know, out of respect, and I was like, I need to be here. Like these are people who I've grown up with and wouldn't necessarily call family, but they were close enough that like they felt like family in a sense. They felt like they had always been there since we had moved in 2003, I think it was. Um, and Pedro especially, him and my dad, I think were uh, probably the closest thing that my dad has had to a best friend since his like high school friends. um, and it was really nice to see him as now me as an adult and with my father to see him be that vulnerable. He spoke at his gave the eulogy, um, and one thing that he said that um, stuck with me and is something that I carry with me now for sure. Um, is this idea of loving your neighbor, and I think him and Pete were great. Our Pete was, and my dad I think is a great example of loving your neighbor, and I think that's something that um, we talked about 2024. Like that's something that I think is dreadfully lacking um, in all aspects of our society and community is that sense of community. I feel like we've either gone into our cliques and we've kind of forgotten who else is around us, and we kind of put the blinders on and live in our own worlds, and we have our tight circle and that's it. But there are so many people beyond that, even just like a couple doors down from us. Like it's one thing to take care of your family, and then it's another thing to then invite other people into that space with you and grow your family, not by blood but by connection. um and I think we need to just in general get back to a sense of being good neighbors. Who was it, Mr. Rogers just had the movie out, um and the romanticism of I think a generation past, like people talk about the 1950s, 1960s, or whatever being this, which it was not for a lot of people, but that idea of like neighborliness, I think, was much more ingrained in our culture, and we've started to really pull out of that for a variety of reasons, and we don't have to get into that. But that's something that I definitely feel I've learned growing up here is how to be a good neighbor, how to be a good friend, for sure. And I think that's what's carried me through a lot of my relationships, um, and whether or not I still maintain those today, there's always the connection is still there, and that connection can always be rekindled and relit. Um, Case in point. Um, so yeah, this town has definitely shaped a lot of who I am, and whether or not you know people like to admit, oh, I'm from a small town, and this and this. It tends to be very polarizing. Like you get people who love being from a small town and like are really that's who they are, that's their personality, and then you have other people who like really try to reject it and push themselves away from it and kind of stand above it in a sense. And I'm like, I don't consider myself to be either of those people. I recognize that, like everything in life, there are good things and bad things. I don't think anything is ever fully good or fully bad. Um, but you learn from it. It shapes who you are, um, and you can just if you can come back and be appreciative and be grateful for where you've come from. I think that speaks more to who you are as a person and what you've learned from growing up in these spaces and then taking that with you outside of those spaces. And we talked earlier about the importance of moving away, and that was really huge for me. Um, was I loved staying here, I loved being here and growing up here, but I desperately wanted to get away just to have a different perspective and just to be surrounded by other people and not live in kind of like a homogenous community. Um, and just learn, because there's so much out there in the world and there's so many amazing things. And again, going back to that, being instilled with a love of learning, um, learning through experience is one of the greatest things that you can do. It's one thing to put your nose in a book and sit there and just absorb and absorb and absorb. It's another thing to then apply that out in the real world, and then it's another thing to apply, fail, and learn and be like, oh, this isn't at all what I thought it was going to be. This is not what the book said. This is actually completely different than what the book said, and this might have just been one perspective. Let me read another book and see if there's another. Like there's just getting out of that space is valuable and is much needed.
Yeah, I want to build off that, and we could also pivot into the travel stuff with
Yeah.
graduating into going to New York. I think what you really hit on too right there is the connection aspect.
Yeah.
And obviously for people that listen, obviously I hyperfixate on connection, hence the name. But the the thing that we really do miss in society is having those connections, and that's part of why I wanted to get back to this. And I think in the I've never really updated the summary of what this podcast was because I never felt like I had to, but it was always getting back to the individual and having those person to person conversations that we once had
Yeah.
that we no longer do. And part of the reason I never went virtual was because I wanted the energy in the room to be here as we talk.
Yeah.
I wanted you to feel it. I wanted people to feel comfortable. I wanted all this the eye contact to work on things, to hear things. And with the virtual aspect, and this goes hand to hand with the internet and social media of why this connection stuff is kind of separated, is sometimes we just see people as people on a screen and not
Yeah.
real people. And obviously we can go down the rabbit hole with AI and stuff that's eventually coming and working its way into society. But we need to get back to trying to like nurture those relationships with people around us, whether it's just someone on a bench in a park that you walk by, or
Mm.
someone at your local coffee shop that you love to get coffee with, having that interaction with them that just like might help their day be better, because you might not know they might have a shitty customer that comes in at like 8 o'clock and you're the one that comes in at 8:05, and you could be the one that makes the difference for their day. But it's having that relationship and working on that. Like I love, and my girlfriend will probably get a kick out of this, I love Baja's right in East Providence
Mhm.
they put there. I love going there and it's like the guy's like, hey, hello my friend, and just like hearing that and like having him recognize me that I come in like every Sunday. It's like my
Yeah.
church, and like but having that relationship with the people that you're around constantly, and just it's something small like that that makes a difference, that I constantly think about and reference, and having that like connection there.
Yeah.
And having that relationship with people and reconnecting, like you said, I think is so valuable. Where um I've put that out there as part of like the thing with the podcast is, if you want to come back, let's reconnect and like talk about what's happened,
Yeah.
because this is the introduction to you. After this, it's we talk about whatever now.
Yeah.
It's just I got to introduce your life story because this part of like my whole process, but the conversation continues to grow every time you come back.
Yeah.
And that's like my hope and desire with this podcast, to continue to grow with that, and the connections to continue to develop, and getting back to reconnecting and forming new connections on top of that, I think is super valuable.
Mhm.
Turning towards what you were talking about with uh, going to New York, talk to me a little bit about, like, I know you mentioned a little bit, but the decision after high school to really make that and then go into kind of how things have been in New York for you.
Yeah, so after high school, I went to Northeastern for a 5-year program, and uh, yeah, I think when I got there, my first year at college actually was very eye opening for me in a great way, and it was really everything that I kind of wanted. I lived in the dormitory was called International Village, which, true to its name, was like literally just tons of people who had come to the university, and I was in the honors program, so it was a lot of different people from all over the world, all over the United States, um, and we all just were kind of there in the honors program. So we that was our only kind of connection. We all had different majors. So I was with economics majors, I was with PT majors, I was with liberal arts majors. Like we just all could like learn off of each other, and we found our friends not by our majors, but by just our shared interests as people, which I think was so important and valuable for me than going into the rest of my collegiate years. Because after that, like I most of my friends then were through my program, but I still maintained all of those other connections for the most part that I met my first year. Um, and then from there, I was an orientation leader for the next summer, which par for the course with me. Like that was a great time. I had an amazing time being like a mentor with a lot of different people coming in, um, and yeah, so college happened. I did some internships, co-ops as they called them. Um, Yeah, I did my first one in Waltham at a company called Simpson Gumpertz and Hager (SGH), doing heavy civil, which is like geotechnical. The first Church of Christ Scientists in Boston, right by the reflecting pool, I've actually went underneath that, which is awesome. The building's actually sinking because when they some civil engineering stuff, when they dewatered the area to build a Prudential Center, that building, the church, sits on timber piles, and so you would think, if wood is underwater, it's going to rot. Not necessarily. It's only once it's then exposed to oxygen that it'll start to rot. So once all that water went down, the water table dropped, the wood starts to mold and to rot and to weaken, and so you got to see the building sink. And so our job was basically to do like elevation monitoring and check how much the building was sinking over time in conjunction with the work that was going on there. So I got to go underneath like the belly of the beast and see like the pile caps and like all these massive concrete pillars, and really cool places it's taken me. But so that was that. I did Simpson Gumperzenhager SGH again in Los Angeles. I lived there for 6 months in 17, 18, in Culver City, which was a lot of fun. We did building envelope and facade work, so waterproofing, glazing and glass. Let's see. Yeah, that one took me to San Diego. I was like off the side of a building spraying water on some like apartment windows to make sure that they were secure and sealed properly. And then my last internship was at the company I'm at now, which is called Silman. And I lived in New York. I lived in Brooklyn for 6 months, and I commuted into FiDi. And yeah, living in New York. I had been there once before on like a spring break, and I just really fell in love with the city. I fell in love, I think, more with the city when I went to Los Angeles. I think Boston is a great college city. I think it's at the middle point between like a New York and like a just like a town. Like it feels more like a town, but it looks like a city, is how I would describe Boston. And so Los Angeles is very much um, that first kind of city, the introduction to city. And then yeah, New York was just everything I could have possibly wanted. It's just being at the epicenter of a lot of things, and being able to connect with so many different people, cultures, backgrounds, ethnicities. Like that's to me what the essence of life is making those connections and um making enough different connections. Like you there's so much value in perspective, in others perspectives. Like you can't just go through life with a certain mindset, or being surrounded by certain people. Like you have to break out of that. And again, like leaving home, it's great to come back home, but leaving home and being outside of that space is so important. um but yeah, so I've bebopped around in New York. I lived in Brooklyn for a little bit. I lived in Hell's Kitchen. I lived in Upper East Side. I lived in the Bronx. I'm back in the Upper East Side. I'm in East Harlem now. um so I've kind of been all over the place, seen a couple of the neighborhoods. Um, I love living in East Harlem too. I love the neighborhood that I'm in. Um, and I've loved all the neighborhoods that I'm in. Some of them, Brooklyn was not really my speed. I love Brooklyn. I love going out there to hang out, but I always joke that I resist going out into Brooklyn, and then once I'm there, I have a great time. So I'm like, it's just making the trek. Um, but yeah, living in New York has been a dream. And I, I will say that the dream is starting to become a little bit of a nightmare. New York is going through some interesting leadership transitions right now. Um, but I think other than that, the people are what really makes the city, and the people that I've found and the networks that I've established in that city is what really keeps me there. So um, to actually, even what you said about going to what was the place that you mentioned? It was
Boss.
Bajas, yeah. So when I first moved to the city, I only knew two people, and I knew these two people through a gay Facebook group. It was called GAG, God Another Gay Group, and that was a collective of like 5,000 gay guys from around the world. It was like Australia, London, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and I would just like went on just to see like what is this, like what is this network of people that I like identify with but have no idea like what this life is yet. Because still very new, very young gay, coming out in college, second year of college actually. And yeah, so I met a few people on there, and once I moved to the city, I connected with them. One of them does the lights at a bar formerly called Therapy. So that was always a joke, like, "Oh, I'm going to therapy tonight." And it's like, "Oh, really?" I'm like, "No, I'm going to drink my life away." Um, and yeah, so I would hang out by the DJ booth. He did the lights for all the drag shows. Um, and that's how I like made all my friends in New York, was just going to that same bar over and over and over again, hanging out by the DJ booth, hanging out with him, and then he would introduce me to, I knew like the managerial staff, um I knew the security outside, I knew the doorman, I knew the bartenders, like that kind of became like my family. And it still is. Like the bar is now called Hush. It closed during COVID and came under new management, but my friend still works there, still does the lights. And so I was like, well, I'm just gonna go back here and hang out. That place is good energy for me. And even between owners, like the people who work there are obviously different, but it's the same energy, it's the same love, it's the same sense of community. Um and and that's something that, especially in New York, while there obviously are issues in the gay community when it comes to community and being accepting of each other, um not only just like our kind of like spectrum of LGBTQ and whether or not certain letters should be in there, or and then bringing it back to racial issues within the LGBTQ community. Like there's so many, it's just a microcosm of what the rest of us experience daily. um there's still like that sense of community, like you still belong to a group and you still have people there that are willing to stick their necks out for you, or give you a place to sleep if you need it. Like it's the friendships that I've made after coming out and living authentically as myself in the real world, especially in New York, have been, I cannot say enough good things about those relationships and those. Yeah, it's there are really no words. Like it's finding your tribe, and it's finding the people that you trust outside of your family, or the people who are closest to you that you've grown up with. Like meeting adult friends and making friends as an adult, people always say, is like so hard, it's so difficult, which it is. But when you make them, like they really are ride or die. So
Because at that point too, you're more likely than not your true self or closer
exactly,
to your true self.
exactly.
So the relationships you're making tend to be aligned with things that you guys share in interests
Yeah,
versus a lot of the times that our friends in our hometown or even college are kind of just by you're in the same place at the same time and
geographic, yeah.
it's just really based on that. And by chance you might find the right people that become lifelong friends and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But it sounds like based on what you've been talking about that New York was like kind of the perfect place for you to like really discover yourself
yeah,
as a person and who you really want to be and help you align yourself with where you want to go as well as that.
exactly.
And I think that ties into perfectly where we could transition next is kind of the stuff that you've been working on, and being probably in New York has allowed you to meet really great people to help start working in this activism space.
Yeah, so oddly enough, the work that I'm doing right now in activism started primarily online. So I met this woman. When I started my tarot reading journey in 2020, um, I don't know if I had mentioned that.
No, you
That
haven't
was
on
in
the
okay, yeah,
podcast.
that was in the pre-interview. So that's another thing too. Is during COVID, um, April of 2020, I March and April, I went through a really difficult kind of like breakup. Emotional. I don't call it a breakup because it wasn't officially a relationship, but it was
The
enough. It was a
situationship.
situation. It
Yeah.
was enough of a relationship that it felt like it, and it hurt just as bad as if it had been a real relationship. Um, to be fair, I'm actually still friends with those people to this day, and that's a whole other
Sure, that's a good idea?
a whole.
Okay,
Well,
okay,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay.
Um, that's, I could also talk about. We can do this another time if I come back. My journey with like polyamory too has been very interesting, and eye opening. But no, speaking to the activism stuff, like I met this woman through my tarot journey, and found her on Instagram, like doing a lot of like indigenous spirituality. She worked with these things called like animal medicine cards, and there's a story for each of the animals and what they represent. Um, and that spoke to me as not only someone who considers themselves like a storyteller, or like wants to be a storyteller, in a sense, but just kind of getting back to getting back to the earth. As an engineer, someone who works with steel and concrete and engineered materials and fabricated synthetics, and eh, we have so much we have so much in the earth, and we've forgotten like our connection to that. And so to have that kind of, to be exposed to that, I think was a pivotal point for me, not only as in a spiritual sense, but also just like as a person, and how I now try to approach my relationships, my job, and everything else. Is bringing us back to the earth, and what does that mean for us, on an individual level, but also as a community and collective. Um, but I started following her. I reached out to her, got a reading from her, which was just beyond, um, like to a T, one of the best readings I've ever gotten. And yeah, so she and I just kind of developed this like mentor mentee relationship, and she has other people that she's mentored. But over time, I ended up meeting her daughter, June. And June has done a lot with PR and activism, and has been doing this for most of her life. And yeah, after the events of October, and the aftermath that we're witnessing now, there came a point where both of us at the same time, we had known each other a little bit for before then. Uh, we both just on our own started to look into like tax resistance, and going back to like the Vietnam era with Joan Baez, and she refused over 60% of her income taxes. For, I believe she continued that for a number of years, because the Vietnam War was like 10 years or so. Um, and the tax resistance started through, um like phone tax, like you have to pay the landline phone tax, and that was about 500,000 people at its peak were resisting that, and then another 20,000 or so were resisting the income tax directly. um but she and I just kind of researched this at the same time, and we were just messaging each other, and we're like, hey, let's do something with this. Like, everyone online, we noticed the pattern seems to be saying like, I don't want my taxes to be funding this. I don't want my taxes to be funding war, genocide, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're sending so much money out of this country, and we're not investing back into our communities. Like, the big push for voting for Biden was student debt forgiveness. We haven't seen a not They have done some, I will say that, but the level to which we were expecting is not even close to
Yeah, they
what
did
has
the
been
bare
given. They
minimum.
did the bare minimum. Um, and I will say, Kamala Harris is just like an episode of Veep. Like, Julia Louis Dreyfus is a psychic for her to make that show, and then have the current vice president that we have today. It's Simpsons level psychic mediumship. Like, it's wild. Um, but anyway, um, yeah. So we just started looking into tax resistance, what that means. And I think there's a lot of yeah, that we saw a lot of people saying like, I don't want to pay for this. We shouldn't have to pay for this. But what can we do? Like, the IRS is so powerful. Like, you can get arrested. Blah, blah. And the more we looked into it, we connected with the National Tax Resistance Organization that's been in America for, I don't even know how many years now. Like, it's been around for generations. But it's the NWTRCC, the National War Tax Resistance Coordination Committee. And so we got in touch with leaders of that group, and now we're putting together a coalition to kind of bring this to the greater, um, the greater public, and just say, listen, we have all these other protests going on. There's calls for a general strike. There's calls for BDS and boycott, divestment, sanctions. There's calls for what we're calling like voting resistance, which is not voting for either the primary Democrat or Republican, but looking to other options. Like, how can we start to break ourselves free of this cycle of trauma that the two-party system has kept us in for so long, kept us placated in consumerism and consumption and commodity. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. We have some big plans to launch in the new year. We have something dropping in the next couple days that I won't say yet, but I can. We have an Instagram. It's at wtp.resist. Um, and the email is the same. if you want to contact us. But I actually wrote a blog post for the National War Tax Resistance Coordination Committee that they sent out, which was basically just like a call to action, and that got some pretty. The response to that was not necessarily what I was like expecting. It was I mean, I don't even know what I was to be fair, I didn't even know what I was expecting, what we were expecting out of this. Like we just kind of came together and said something needs to be done. We talked about earlier, like the answering the call. Like we both had the same idea at the same time. We both looked into it simultaneously, and just it aligned for us. Um, and nobody else seemed to be doing it. Again, people were talking about it, like conceptualizing, is this something that we could do? Yes, it's going to take a lot of people um, to make it work. But I think from what we've seen on not only a national scale but a global scale, with the amount of people who have come out physically to protest and march in these millions of numbers, um, even going back as like the marches on Washington, the Women's March in Washington, like there's so many people that are gathering together. We were like, we just need to start it. We just need to do something, and the people will follow. As long as we can continue to, preach a message of community and focus on rebuilding ourselves, because our leadership isn't doing it. We can't rely on the people we've elected anymore. And I say elected because, again, we're in this
Interesting word too nowadays.
yeah, we're in this space of there are certainly younger progressive candidates who are coming up, but it's incredibly difficult for them to get things like funding, to get the reach that they would need to pursue these things. And politics for a long time, um, even to put a broad stroke to it, has usually just been about, think of it like royal bloodlines. Like a lot of people who are in politics, their kids are now in politics, and their grandkids will be in politics, and it just continues down the line. You have these families, generations that have been in politics, and it's like, I thought we like left the rule of monarchy. Like what are we doing here? And we just need to have newer voices in.
Set term limits, age limits. So there needs to be some like it's just very it's crazy that people, and I'm not going to get too deep into the politics of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
stuff, but like just like people will listen to this stuff, and it's like I think almost everyone can agree we shouldn't have people that are not going to see the laws that they implement like
absolutely,
in the presidency or even in elected officials. They should not be
absolutely,
making rules that we have to live with that they won't have to live with. That's
absolutely.
crazy that it's even gotten to that place. And to go off with your stuff, your work in activism, I think everyone can, whether it doesn't matter really what side you agree with. I think in terms of funding wars, we don't want to do that. And I think that
Exactly.
across the board, most people feel that way. We should stop sending our money to fight wars. They're kind of proxy wars too. We're using other people to fight wars for us when we shouldn't be doing that. We should be investing into our own country because we need that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like sabotage, like on purpose. Sometimes it makes you really question the conspiracy theory. Is like, are we doing this to ourselves to a certain extent?
Yeah.
And it goes down that rabbit hole. We don't need to go down that necessarily, but I think the work that you're doing, I think, is extremely valuable, and it's not, and at least in my opinion, it doesn't seem very polarizing in the sense of like you're not isolating, like we're really supporting this or this, but
No.
we're not trying to send our hard-earned dollars to other countries to fight wars that we don't agree with. And
Exactly.
especially when you're getting to like the level that's happening in the wars that we are seeing in mainstream media right now.
Yeah, and that's the main message that we're trying to put out there, is that regardless of where you stand on, because I know the big issue is Israel and Palestine, we'll just come out and say it. Like,
Mhm.
regardless of where you stand on that issue, even, or where your politics are, that sense of feeling taken advantage of is universal, and universal in the sense of the public. Um, and so when we're kind of putting out this messaging, we want to make it very clear that, um, we can. There's a whole other kind of like, um, let's say, cult of personality on one side that has been drawing some concerning support. But in a sense, if you want to talk about like people in the middle, moderates on either side. Um, there is definitely a sense of like shock almost that we want to tap into, but also kind of reframe as like we know that you see our individual parties moving in these polarizing, completely opposite directions, and the general, I think, consensus and understanding in the eyes of the American people in general is that we need to bring ourselves back to a place where we can actually have a conversation and talk to each other. And so when we present this idea of tax resistance, um, we also frame it in the um, we want to frame it as being open for everyone who wants to see something change. And what we're encouraging people to do, and I can talk more about this if we have some time, or again, I would encourage people, if you want to look us up, it's at WTP.resist on Instagram. I think we might also have a TikTok, or that's in the work, but you can email us at that same address. But it's also a mass charity event. So in addition to not paying, to explain, we're calling for people to not pay at least 5% of their income taxes in 2024. It's called we're doing a tax blackout. And the goal is to get at least 11 million people to sign on to this. That's the same thing with the general strike. We're trying to go big. Like my goal is to do 50 million. We'll see if we can get there. We might be able to this time around, but we also envision this to be a recurring thing, because it's not going to stop in 2024. We're not going to magically, things are going to go away and fix themselves in a year. It's going to be a long road, and it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of long nights. It's going to be a lot of or long night of the soul, rather, I guess, is what what's that phrase? Dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a lot of that, but the essence is to redirect and to reinvest into local communities. So while you are refusing to pay a certain percentage to the government, and to not fund war or whatever, or if you just like are tired of money being mishandled and misappropriated, um, putting the power back into the hands of the people and saying, okay, we don't trust the money to go to the top and trickle down and get distributed where it needs to be, because that's not happening. It's lining pockets, it's going to lobbyists, it's going to corporate interests, it's going to the pockets of politicians. It's not going to us, wherever it's going. And so if we want to, put a kind of comparison of like the free market of capitalism, the free market is supposed to be, we can spend our money how we want to in the economy, and it will take care of itself, because we are putting our money into where our individual interests are. So we're coming from this place of, well, at this point, our government is basically like the economy now. It's bought and paid for across the board. And if we're going to participate in that, then we should at least have the opportunity and the ability to put our money where we want directly. And so we're also sort of advocating for like a revised tax system, where instead of, again, money going into the government and then distributing, the government can put out our ideas. The government can put out their pie chart of like how they envision money should be distributed. Right now it's like 47% or something. This was the numbers a couple of years ago, but it was like 40% goes to like military expenditure, and 10% to the national debt. I think it was like 15 to Social Security or Medicaid. And so we want to put that back to the people and say, how would you want your taxes to be distributed? What do you think is most valuable? And so it's this concept of ethical redistribution is what we're calling it. Ethical in the sense that, not kind of this general sense of ethic, like what is ethical and what is not ethical, but your individual ethics, your values. If we are trusted in the market economy to pay for what we think is valuable to us, and by that point boost the economy, why don't we do the same with taxes? Like, we have enough of a political spread where certain sides, certain factions would definitely put more money into certain things, but overall, taken as a whole, some of its parts, we have a balanced budget overall. And we're like still working on like numbers to prove that, but it's like in theory, it should be viable, it should be feasible, and it's just about like how do you dismantle or change or adjust or whatever the current system to then allow for more individual power when it comes to taxes and investing in community. So yeah, again, we want to encourage people so for whatever they don't pay, and the 5% is just a suggestion. If they want to go more than that, fantastic. So whatever you're comfortable with. We don't want to force anyone. We don't want to give financial advice. Like that's not what we're about. We just want to pose the challenge really to the American people and say, listen, we're all tired of this shit. Let's try something else, like anything else. And we want to bring it back again to community. So investing in the local community, you don't need to look at like, on the national level, like, oh, which organizations do I want to put them in? It's like, no, focus at home. Like come back to your hometown where you live, where your parents live even, and just be like, where can I put my money? Like look at the sectors of government. We have agriculture, infrastructure, science and tech, health. Like where find those niches of what you value in the community and start to put money into that. And that's kind of the essence of what we're trying to accomplish.
And I think that will hit home for a lot of people, especially when you're talking about their money and where they
Yeah.
want to spend their money. Because I know a lot of us are sick of being taxed on food, taxed on your income, taxed on your car, taxed on. It's just like it just keeps going and going, and it's like, all right, so why are we being taxed on literally everything all the
Yeah.
freaking time? And
we're not seeing it brought back to us. Like
yeah,
if we're taxed so much on toll roads, even it's like, why do the roads suck? Rhode Island has potholes everywhere. Like
New
for
Hampshire should
example.
be a guideline for the way our roads should be. Like
Yeah.
they redo those roads so nicely every single year.
Yeah.
Obviously, they get more snow and inclement weather, but like we also live in New England. Like, come on here, like it can't be that hard to update. Like, especially even just like highways. If we're going to get to like that technical, like, I mean, the fact that we're even having the Rhode Island bridge problem over here,
Oh
like
my
that's
god.
especially you probably could really dive into that. We're not going to go into that
Yeah.
just because time wise, but like to
I saw
allow that
photos. I saw photos. It's horrendous.
to allow things to have gotten that bad and to have known about it,
Yeah.
it's
Covered
actually
up.
actually crazy. I mean, it's a microcosm of what our actual national government
Yeah.
is like. It's kind of crazy to see that locally now, and hopefully people will wake up to the fact of these people are making decisions for us, and this is just like what's happening on our scale. Times it like by 10, by 100, and this is like national governments at this
Yeah.
point. It's really eye opening to see how um how locally this can even affect just everyone around us.
Yeah.
And even then Seekonk, the amount of traffic that we've seen because of this. They've done the bypass and I mean it's working for now, but like it's not long-term solution. You can't
No.
allow that. You have to fix that.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy to see that on this scale. And I think that was like is kind of somewhat ties into what we're talking about. And I feel like it was good to bring up.
Yeah.
I want to bring us home now with the podcast. We are getting toward the end of it. I do have one more question for you, which I
Mhm.
mentioned that question off podcast.
Yes.
But is there anything that you want to say, not tied towards that, but if there's anything that we might have missed that you wanted to bring up really quickly?
Let's see.
And if you don't, I just want to give you the opportunity to say something besides that.
No, yeah, I think I've covered. I think I've summarized kind of the last 10 years pretty.
Yeah, it's
pretty
a lot to
succinctly.
digest in an hour, but like
Yeah.
obviously I try to make it good for the listeners and somewhat they'll stick with it and listen through an hour. Because you
Yeah.
get to like the 2, 3, 4 hour podcast, you lose a lot of people.
Yeah,
So
no. And I'm someone, for those of you who are watching who know me, I could talk for a long time, and I love telling stories, and I love having conversations with people and hearing about them. So yeah, I could do this for forever. Yeah, I guess really the only other thing that I could say is, um, the last couple of years, especially like in terms of like a spiritual journey, like I've really felt that there is a collective movement happening unconsciously that's subconsciously and consciously, we'll say, um, that is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, where I'll not be in contact with certain people for like a couple years, and then when I come back to them, they're one of the first things they like to talk about is like their spiritual journey and kind of like where they're at and how they've changed. And I'm seeing that across the board, not only in just my friendships, but other people talking about their friendships, and just seeing this. And I do call it an awakening, and not to be like this, mumbo jumbo. Like obviously, I read and I hear spirits and all that stuff. Um, but like it's just a sense of coming back to what is most important, and really, and again, it's community. Like the thing that is most important right now is community, and breaking free of this individualistic, rugged individualism, that America has seemed to really been pushing, and is at the heart of a lot of the messaging that we receive as Americans. And it's great to be an individual. It's great to have those, to have to have your freedoms, and to live in those freedoms, and be proud of who you are. But I feel like we're so wrapped up in ourselves that we are forgetting everyone else. Um, and it's really amazing to see people going on those journeys, and kind of seeing those connections being made, and seeing people be like, oh yeah, like this is this is what we all should be doing. This is what how we all should be thinking, and this is how we all should be acting towards each other. um and so I encourage everyone who's listening to like really lean into that energy, and that's what's gonna push us forward. um and it takes all of us individually waking up to these things. um that's step one, and then the second step is sharing it with each other. And so keep having those conversations, keep having those discussions of like vulnerable, emotional, psychological, like get into it all with the people who are closest to you, get into it with strangers. Like I am so beyond the small talk at this point. The people that are closest to me in my life are the people that I have difficult and long conversations with about any topic that matters. I'm really big into like talking about space now, and like Dyson spheres, and like, um, space travel and all this stuff. Interstellar was a great movie. My God.
I love that movie.
Um, but like those are the conversations I want to be having. Like I don't want to be talking about like Joe Schmo at work who like brought in tuna salad and it smelled bad. Like, bruh, like that nobody cares. Like tell me something. Like what are you thinking about? Like what are your thoughts on any topic? Like just give me something. And I see a lot more people start to like, um not self isolate, but like pull back into their circle, and the people that like have those conversations with them. So keep having those conversations, lean into that energy, find the people that you can have those conversations with if you don't have them already, because they are out there. Um and yeah, your tribe is waiting for you, I guess. Like that's kind of the best way I can phrase that.
Yeah, I think that's true. A lot of the conversations I've had with people, it's always funny because people be like, "I'm not trying to sound like wokey spiritual," and it's funny because like we're all trying to say the thing without
Yeah.
being labeled as weird or crazy, but
Yeah.
it's like it's actually like feels more normal to talk about this
Yeah.
stuff than it's ever before, and I think it's I've seen it more in the conversations that I've had as well too, and I think it's really cool to see this growth in people, especially as times get crazier. People are looking towards that belief in
Greater
something.
capacity too. A
Yeah.
greater capacity for these conversations is one of the biggest kind of changes I've seen. Like it's so easy for us to just go back to having menial whatever, um low vibrational, if you want to call it that, low frequency conversations. But I definitely see a lot more people like putting in the work, which is fantastic. um Especially coming from someone who put in a lot of work to themselves in the last 10 years for sure, especially in the last 3 since 2020. Like that was, my God, whirlwind of self, epiphanies, growth, whatever. um so yeah, keep being curious, keep asking questions, keep, um letting yourself be open, I guess. Be vulnerable, be as vulnerable as you can, because if you hide yourself from other people, you're missing out on everything. Like there's no point in not being authentic.
I think that's a good messaging for a lot of people. And it takes time and takes some experience too. So if
Yeah,
you're able to get out there, like we've talked about on this podcast, like go out to different places, get out of your circles for a little bit, you might discover some new things about yourself that you're really happy with.
absolutely.
So I do have one last question to kind of tie the bow on this conversation,
Sure.
and that is, what would your advice be for someone who wants to pursue their passion?
Um, let's see. I think I think the first thing is really sit with yourself and ask yourself, what is my passion? I think people tend to have this idea of what a passion is, and it's just like, something that you love doing, or like there's this kind of romanticized idea of passion. And passion is not pretty. Passion is not easy. And as someone who went into the engineering field to be be of service to others, to help others, to build affordable housing in a time where homelessness is the highest it's like ever been. Um, like that's hard work. And now on the activism side, like I'm going into activism having no idea really anything. I have no experience in this, and I'm just learning from people as I go. And but that's the thing, like I love it. Like it's hard work, and sometimes like waking up in the morning and being like, oh my god, I gotta do this. And it's like I don't want to be doing anything else than helping people. I think passion stems from a desire, this is going to rhyme, but a desire to inspire. I think our passions are not only for ourselves, but they're for other people. And so finding a passion that services both you and other people is critical. And if it's only doing one of those things, it's not a passion. And I think people need to be a little bit more self-reflective on what their passions are, and being a little bit more discerning about how they define those concepts for themselves. I think will help people kind of understand the next steps after that, because it- you can jump into a passion and I don't know, like if your heart's not, I think that what I'm trying to say is if your heart's not in it, and by that I mean, again, if it services both other people and yourself, if your heart is not in it, if those two things aren't connected, if it's not again brought back to the sense of community, passion should be servicing other people. Like that's how what I believe truly about passion. um so yeah, have that conversation with yourself, talk to yourself and be like, is this something that I'm doing for myself in almost like a selfish way? Is this a passion of mine because I think it's going to bring me money or bring me success, whatever that means, or achievement, whatever that means, or fame or recognition? Or is it a passion that is driven by a deep need to leave something better for my children, for my neighbors, for the world? Um, I think the advice is redefine passion. I think the advice is to understand. I think first what passion is, and how passion serves, rather than something that is, you know, something to boost our egos. Um, so yeah,
I think that's one of the better advices that I've gotten on this question. We're 166 episodes in, and I really love the way that you put that,
thank you.
because it really does go into that two pronged
Yes.
attachment or pursuit of the passion
Yeah.
itself. Is I always when you were talking about that, I'm like, it really aligned with the way I look at this podcast, because it is for me, but it's also, I feel like a lot of people that have come on and experienced it have enjoyed it as well, and I
Yeah.
think it opens up a new dialogue between me and the guest and possibly their friends and their family that listen to the episode. And I think that's the ultimate goal, is going back to the overarching point that we made throughout this, is the connection in the community
Mm.
aspect. And I think that's a really good take home message for a lot of people, is to really focus on those things throughout. their day-to-day life.
Yeah, and just to add into that too, like for what you have with this podcast, like storytelling is more important now than ever, and the fact that you are documenting people's stories is incredible. Like that, we there's so much value in stories and storytelling, and I feel like we've also kind of that also ties to community in a way, like the word of mouth and passing things down, oral tradition and things like that. Like that's where we as a people, as humans, built much of our civilization off of, is that storytelling and the passing of knowledge and the transfer of the torch. Like that is so important. And I can get into a whole other thing another time with like um the tarot cards in the deck, but one animal that is very close to my heart is the whale. In indigenous spirituality, the whale is called the record keeper, and I have like whale in my chart somewhere. So that idea of like telling stories and keeping record and allowing younger generations to look back and learn is much needed. So I want to commend you for making this endeavor and continuing this endeavor. 166 episodes in, like 200 stories, even if there's like repeats. 200 stories is not something to, you know, to laugh at. Like that's huge. So I want to also congratulate you on an amazing career with this, and hopefully a long one past this episode. So
Yeah, I appreciate it. I look forward to future conversations as well as that
absolutely.
we'll have. And I'm always looking forward to, if you want to make it. I know me and we were talking, Andrew, we were talking
Yeah,
about this. We were talking about, well, we should do this like a yearly thing and like check up and stuff. And if
yeah,
you're ever interested in doing something like that,
absolutely.
I would totally be down for that, because you bring a lot to the table. And I think the conversations are super interesting. The fact that we almost went, it was like, we're closing on 2 hours before we even recorded. I was like, "Oh shit, I gotta like."
Were we really? I
Yeah,
like hadn't even checked my phone.
yeah.
I'm like so oblivious
We
to
were
time.
we were cooking the conversation beforehand, and obviously that's part of the cool part is you get to reconnect with people and have conversations off air
Yeah,
and then on air too. So I think it's as a host, I think it's the coolest thing in the world to get to see people be themselves and talk about shit
absolutely.
they like. And I appreciate you for coming on the podcast and talking about your life the way you have. So.
Thank you.
Thank you for you guys. If you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your grandma. Check out the carrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search the Carroll Connection or at Jared M. Carroll, and it'll pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at the Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. So, until next time, guys, peace.